We appreciate all of the guests who have appeared on our show and sincerely thank them for providing you, our audience, with useful information. However, the advice our guests provide is theirs, and we encourage you to seek out a professional if you have specific questions about any topic we cover on the Crushing Debt podcast. On this week's episode of the Crushing Debt podcast, my interview with Santa.
Welcome to the Crushing Debt Podcast with your host, Florida attorney Sean Yesner, where our goal is to help you get rid of the financial bullies in your life.
So welcome back to this week's episode of the Crushing Debt Podcast. My name is Sean Yesner, owner and founder of Yesner Law, and I have a very, very special guest on the show this week, and I'm not entirely sure how to introduce him. I think everybody knows him, although I don't know that anyone's really seen him. Everyone makes sure that they have the milk and cookies out. Everyone decorates the house for him. Everyone sends him their list of what they want for Christmas. He knows who's been naughty, who's been nice, and I guess that's as good an introduction as I can do. So my guest this week is Santa Claus. Welcome, Santa.
Well, ho, 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 everyone. I'm so glad to be on the Yesner podcast. I thought I was going to be on the Daniel Tosh show, but apparently Mrs. Claus has been booking me for all sorts of other things as well, just to keep me out of the house.
Well, and I know that normally you and I wouldn't do very much talking, me celebrating Hanukkah and whatnot, but I got my introduction to you, and I want to give a little bit of a testimonial to Joe Cairns, a friend of mine who has his own law firm doing family law, divorce law, those kinds of aspects, and I know that's how we got introduced.
Yes, I'm well aware of Joe Cairns. I've met him several times, and quite honestly, I think he's wearing out the relationship. He asks me for several favors all the time.
Well, and I appreciate the favor of you being on the show.
I think this is one of them as well.
Well, and speaking of people that really wouldn't have a lot of contact with you necessarily, the sponsor of the podcast I talk about all the time is a gentleman named Sam Cohen, who owns Attorneys First Insurance, and he provides errors and omissions policies to attorneys and title companies.
I know Sam. I went to high school with Sam.
So
about 900 years old. I think he was 2 years my junior when we were in high school, and I believe it was But honestly, what you don't understand is that Santa was a regular person back in the day. This was back in Italy in the Middle Ages, and Sam Cohen and I, we were good buddies.
Did you help him get his insurance firm up and running, or about what his insurance firm does, right?
No, Sam actually took a lot of money off of me. He's a serious gambler, and he started his own insurance firm probably off the backs of my organization.
So, but, we thank you for those contributions, because without them, Sam would not be able to provide the E&O insurance, the malpractice insurance, to attorneys and title companies all over the country.
Yes, attorneys absolutely need Sam. I understand that. I'm just saying, why did it have to be me that he had to use to start his companies?
Well, you got to become a better gambler there, Santa, but we definitely appreciate it.
Well, I don't gamble anymore. I don't play any of those reindeer games.
So let's talk a little bit about how you and Joe first met. And I know there's some attorney-client privilege there, and so I appreciate that you can talk about some of these issues outside of the attorney-client privilege. But how did you first meet Joe?
Well, as it happened, Mrs. Claus and I were having some issues, and what you should also know is that I am technically a Florida resident. I lived here 6 months and exactly 1 day. I have a Florida-issued driver's license. I also have a commercial CDL, which allows me to run around with the reindeer. So I was talking to Joe about, what would I do if I was going to be a single Santa? And he basically informed me that it was possible that the reindeer would be split. My organization that I've spent centuries building would be an issue. And he actually told me, he goes, maybe it's just something that's just a problem now that isn't a major issue, and that maybe some sort of family counseling would help. Because quite honestly, he told me straightforward that she would end up with Rudolph and I would get Blitzen. And quite honestly, Blitzen's a biter. That was a problem. So ultimately, we got back together, we settled our differences, and everything has been fine since, except for like one or two little things here and there. depending on, what's for dinner.
So the reindeer would be what, considered pets, or would they be considered property? How do you figure out who gets what reindeer within the context of a possible separation?
Joe's word was the word chattel, which I informed him they aren't cows. And he informed me the chattel is just property. It's just some sort of weird English word for stuff. And I said, well, you can't put a value on reindeer. He goes, well, I'm about to try if this is what we're going to do. And I go, oh. And that's when he told me that if I wanted to keep most of the reindeer, I would have to give her Rudolph. And that wasn't going to happen. I mean, I am not the owner of Amazon. I can't simply just give her the stock. There is no stock. We're in the North Pole. We're not really a actual corporation. It's kind of, to use a word, we're a Russian company, quite honestly.
So, but what about, say, for example, the elves? Who would get custody of the elves?
The elves, that was another problem. They're employees. They're not, even though I treat them as family, I view them as family, they are not biologically ours. So they were going to be part of the business. They don't have, and I hate to say this, they don't have a value. They are employees of the company. And quite honestly, I don't know what other business they would be able to engage in. I mean, Willy Wonka, I don't even know if he's in business anymore. I don't know if he can take them on. I mean, I have 500 of them, and they are industrious fellows. I love them. But they would, if the company fell apart, the world would be on its end, which, if it was going to happen, it appears that this would be the year.
So Joe is able to help you salvage your relationship. Sometimes divorce may or may not be the best option. So how is he able to help you and Mrs. Claus reconcile?
He used this word, irreconcilable differences. Basically, that it was beyond repair. And I said, I don't think it's beyond repair, but that's also a question for her as well at the same time. And I went back to her with that. Do you think it's irreconcilable? Do you think that there's nothing we could do to repair this marriage? And ultimately, Anya, that's her real first name, by the way, she told me that yes, we could repair this. It just meant that I was going to live with the reindeer for a couple of months, and ultimately everything was okay.
So if someone is having issues with family law, divorce, especially during this time, especially during the holidays, they can contact Joe. It's Cairns at Cairns Law, and I'll spell it CAIRNS at CAIRNSlaw.com. And his website is the same, www.cairnslaw.com, CAIRNSlaw.com. And I'll put that in the notes for anyone, sort of my version of your nice and naughty list would be the show notes for this particular episode. And I'll put all that in the episode so that if people want to reach out to Joe and ask him questions, and I know that Joe's firm does a lot of other things. So, for example, if you did want to potentially adopt the elves, Joe's firm can help with that as well, right?
That's my understanding. His wife, Jerica, typically handles the, we'll call it the happy stuff. So absolutely, if it's a step parent, or if there's some sort of case where you are the foster parent and you wish to adopt the children, Mrs. Cairns can absolutely help you out.
Well, and I know that as we record this, I thank you for your time. I know you're getting geared up for your busy season. This episode is going to release on Christmas Eve, which I know is game time for you. But I know that if you had adopted the elves and they were all still up in the North Pole, and you and Mrs. Claus were to end up getting divorced and you had to move the elves down to Florida, that would be more than a radius of 50 miles. And so you would need court permission for that, right?
Well, if in fact they were considered children of mine, then that would be an issue. Because ultimately I would want to, if I had to move from the North Pole, I'd want to be in some sort of tax shelter. I don't know where exactly that would be, but quite honestly, my current situation is perfect.
Okay. Well, and I want to turn a little bit. I know this is the Crushing Debt podcast, and so I want to turn a little bit to some issues of debt and divorce and how those two interplay. And so, not to get too personal, Santa, but I know that a lot of time a factory of your size takes a significant amount of debt to run, and you have your high season, your low season. Right now, like I said, it's your time. And I know that in terms of family law, a lot of times debt will cause some of those divorce issues. So how do you help structure the factory and the debt of the factory so that you make sure you don't get into those issues of too much debt to fund all the toys that you give out to all the children across the world?
Well, years ago, I used to curse Jeff Bezos' name. I thought that he was my competitor, that he was becoming Santa Claus himself. As it turns out, he's actually been my greatest asset. The issue is my factory for centuries was based on handmade toys. And then the electronic age occurred, really in the 70s and the 80s. And the electronics, they weren't anything that the elves were actually particularly familiar with. And then as the 90s rose and Amazon came to be, he was able to help me transport and transmit all of these various devices that I had no idea what they were. No idea. A Nintendo Switch, to this day, if you showed me one, I couldn't point it out in a lineup. So Amazon has been able to help. United States Postal Service has been able to help. DHL, even though they're horribly slow, they've been able to help. And obviously the reindeer, which is I still find the most efficient means of delivering mail these days. But we can only do it sustained over a 24-hour period. That's what we've done, and I hate to say it, but Santa has an Amazon credit card. That's what we use. And that's why I'm able to maintain my residence in Florida, because quite honestly, the miles save me.
Well, and I can only imagine what it must be like. December is your time, but then once we get into March, April, May, June, July, what do you do to help offset some of that debt that you have? What do you do to help offset so that you avoid the highs and the lows?
Well, for the first 2 months, I just ignore everything because I'm basically asleep. So till about February is when I wake up, and then I am hit with the invoices by the elves who have been trying to wake me up during my slumber for those 2 months. But at this point, they are well aware that that is my 60 days off, and then we get behind. But we are a non-profit organization. We are not solely funded by a single individual. So typically what occurs is that we have to get on our high horse. We have to start asking people, if you want Santa next year, you're going to have to give us some money. And that's how it happens. And quite honestly, people are very good about it. They absolutely are. Israel hasn't given us any money recently, but I understand that. They go to Hanukkah Harry. He's a good friend of mine as well, so I understand he has a job to do as well.
He's already been. So Hanukkah was early this year, and so he's already visited our house.
Oh yes, he's already been by my house asking, "What am I doing today?" Like as if he doesn't know.
So, one question that I had. So, as you probably know, Santa, I've written a couple of books. One is called Crushing Debt, which is based on this podcast. The other is called Become Debt Free, where I help a lot of people to get out of debt and to become debt free. But my question is, what do you?
I can't say that I've actually heard of them because none of the children have ever asked for them.
So, yeah, thanks. So, I assume that they would be considered coal versus stocking stuffers, yes?
I would say that they would be great for leveling a table. They would also be good if you have if you have several copies, you could use them to vent a door that's letting cold air in. But yes, I assume if you had debt issues, that would also be useful.
Well, of course, Become Debt Free is more of a electronic version, so I don't know that it would be propping unless you were to download it on like your iPad or your Kindle and then use that to prop the table, prop the door.
I don't know what this Kindle thing is.
You really got to look into some technology there, Santa.
I let the elves handle it.
Well, Santa, I really appreciate you being a guest on this week's show. I typically give my guests an opportunity before I wrap up to talk about anything that I might have missed or anything that I forgot to ask. Is there anything that you want to add before we wrap up the episode?
I can just say this, that Joe, I told him I was going to be doing this, to which he laughed. And I'm not sure why he was laughing so hard, but He said, just tell Sean it's important to shave. I know that Joe and him have the same haircut. They're both bald as eagles. But at least Joe shaves. Mr. Yesner does not. I think that's just a personal styling choice. But I don't think you missed anything, Sean. I appreciated being on the show. This has been a lot of fun. I can see you in the background. It appears that you're working in a closet of some sort. So I'm greatly appreciative of the time so that maybe 5 or 10 people can hear my voice on December 24th.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that, Santa, because if you were to have given me any kind of present, the podcast just this morning as we record crested over 100,000 downloads. So I do appreciate you providing me with that gift of.
Now that is one industrious fellow. He's downloading it 100,000 times.
It is, and actually, ironically,
you have a nice wife, sir. You have a nice wife.
I do. One that's allowed me to come and record this episode when we have family stuff to do. So. I know you're busy getting ready for your ride tonight. Although as this show is released, it'll be your ride on December 24th. As we record this, I know you have a few more wood airplanes and toy trains and whatnot to oversee. So
it's important to note that I was on Larry King before, and this is where I am now.
Well, another one, Larry King, you and Sam Cohen all graduated right around the same time. Yes,
Larry King's actually older than me.
Okay. Well, we appreciate you being on the show, Santa, and relay back to Joe, or I'll relay back to Joe. Thanks for connecting us. And I know that I will encourage, as will you, people that have issues with family law, especially during this time of year. Give Joe a call. He is a divorce attorney, but like me, bankruptcy is not all I do. Divorce is not all Joe does. And so there could be times where he can even help you salvage your relationship. But if that's not possible, then Joe and Jerica are there to assist with the divorce and any of the other family law issues that come up.
Thank you for that little plug for Joe. I will let him know. I'm sure you will as well.
And hopefully that gets me a little bit closer to the nice list.
I wouldn't push it.
Thank you, Santa. I appreciate it. That will do it for this week's episode of the Crushing Debt Podcast, and we look forward to talking to you in next week's New Year's Eve episode.
If you have questions that you think would make a great topic for a future episode, please email Sean or connect with us on social media. Sean Yesner and Yesner Law, PL, are Florida licensed attorneys. The information contained in this week's episode is not a substitute for legal advice. Your situation may differ, especially if you are located somewhere other than the state of Florida. If you have questions, please contact our office or contact a local attorney. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Crushing Debt Podcast.